Do you still have access to Daniel's accounts? Those were the first words my daughter-in-law asked me less than 10 minutes after I learned my only son was dead. I had just turned 71 3 days earlier. The white roses from my birthday dinner were still sitting in crystal vases around my dining room, and a chocolate cake wrapped carefully in plastic sat untouched in my refrigerator because Daniel had promised he would come by the following weekend to celebrate with me properly. He never made it. I remember staring at the grandfather clock near the staircase while the state trooper spoke softly through the phone. His voice sounded far away, muffled, like it was traveling through water. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm very sorry to inform you." After that, everything inside me seemed to stop moving. My son Daniel was 42 years old. He owned a successful financial consulting company in Boston. He wore tailored suits, drove expensive cars, and called me every Sunday morning no matter how busy he was. Or at least he used to. Over the last 2 years, his calls had grown shorter. Quieter. Sometimes I could hear Vanessa speaking in the background before he suddenly ended the conversation. I stood motionless in my kitchen holding the edge of the marble counter while snow drifted softly outside the windows of my Connecticut home. The house suddenly felt too large. Too silent. My husband Richard had passed away 12 years earlier, and after decades of building investment portfolios together, I had more money than I could spend in one lifetime. $8.4 million spread across trusts, retirement accounts, and investments. Daniel used to joke that I was the richest retired librarian in New England. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Not the money. Not the house. Not the lake property in Vermont. None of it could change what I had just heard. Then my phone rang again. Vanessa. I answered immediately, expecting tears, panic, grief. Instead there was only breathing for a moment before she asked quietly, "Margaret, do you still have access to Daniel's accounts?" I said nothing at first because surely I had misunderstood her. My son had just died. The words still hung in the air around me like smoke. But Vanessa cleared her throat and spoke again, this time more carefully. "I just mean, there are business expenses. Employees. Bills. I don't know what passwords he changed recently." Her voice trembled in all the right places, but something about it felt rehearsed. Cold underneath the sadness. I lowered myself slowly into one of the dining chairs and looked across the long mahogany table where Daniel used to sit during Christmas dinners. I could still picture him at 10 years old, laughing while powdered sugar from my homemade cookies covered his sweater. For a second, I almost broke apart completely. But then Vanessa spoke again. "Margaret? Are you there?" I looked down at my reflection in the polished wood table. My silver hair was perfectly styled from church that morning. My pearl earring still matched the navy sweater I had worn to my birthday dinner. I suddenly realized I was still dressed for a normal life that no longer existed. "Yes," I answered quietly. "I'm here." Outside, snow continued falling over the empty driveway while somewhere 200 miles away, strangers were preparing my son's body for burial. And deep in my chest, underneath the grief, underneath the shock, something colder had already begun to form. Because a mother knows when something feels wrong. And in that moment, I knew Vanessa was afraid of something far bigger than losing her husband. The funeral took place 4 days later beneath a gray February sky that made the entire cemetery look drained of color. I arrived early, long before the first black sedan rolled into the circular driveway of St. Andrew's Chapel. The snow from the previous night still covered the grass in thin, uneven patches, and the cold air stung my lungs each time I breathed. I sat alone in the front pew holding Daniel's childhood photograph inside my gloves because I could not bring myself to look at the larger portrait displayed near the altar. In the picture he was 9 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, smiling proudly while holding a fishing rod beside Lake Champlain. That was before business schools and investment firms and expensive watches. Before Vanessa. Guests slowly filled the chapel with whispers and lowered eyes. Men Daniel worked with approached me carefully, shaking my hand and telling me how brilliant my son had been. Women I barely recognized hugged me gently and said things like, "He talked about you all the time," or, "You must be so proud of him." I nodded politely through all of it because grief had turned me into a machine performing familiar movements without feeling connected to any of them. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes late wearing a fitted black coat with oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Two of her friends walked beside her carrying designer handbags and speaking softly about flower arrangements and hotel reservations. She removed her sunglasses only when people turned toward her. Then came the tears. Perfectly timed. Perfectly measured. Emma walked behind her mother quietly with her shoulders pulled inward beneath a wool coat that was too thin for the weather. My granddaughter looked exhausted. There were dark shadows beneath her blue eyes that reminded me painfully of Daniel. When she saw me, she hesitated for a moment before crossing the aisle and wrapping her arms around me tightly. "I miss him already," she whispered against my shoulder. I held her longer than I intended because she was the only person there who felt real to me. During the service, Vanessa spoke first. She described Daniel as an ambitious husband, a generous provider, and a devoted father. Her voice cracked in all the expected places while guests dabbed their eyes with tissues. But I noticed something strange. She never once called him kind. She never mentioned how every Thanksgiving he volunteered at the shelter downtown because his own father had once depended on free meals during college. She never spoke about the way he used to call me after snowstorms just to make sure I had enough groceries. It was as though she were describing a wealthy stranger instead of my son. After the burial, people gathered inside the church reception hall for coffee and sandwiches. I stood near the window watching snowflakes melt against the glass while conversations buzzed softly behind me. That was when I overheard Vanessa speaking to one of Daniel's business partners near the coat rack. "I just need temporary access until the estate settles," she said quietly. "Most of the accounts are still tied up under Margaret's authorization." My fingers tightened around the paper coffee cup. Estate. Authorization. Accounts. Daniel had been buried less than an hour earlier. I turned slowly and our eyes met across the room. For one brief second, the softness disappeared from Vanessa's face completely. There was no grief there. Only calculation. Then she smiled sadly and walked toward me. "Margaret," she said gently, touching my arm, "you should probably stay with us for a little while. You should not be alone right now." I looked at her polished nails resting against my sleeve and suddenly remembered something Daniel told me last fall during a quiet dinner at my house. "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you will not sign anything without Harold looking at it first." At the time I laughed and told him he sounded paranoid. Now, standing beside my son's widow while snow fell outside the church windows, those words returned to me with frightening clarity. And for the first time since Daniel died, I began to wonder whether my son had been trying to warn me before it was too late. The house felt different after the funeral. Not emptier. Colder. Silence settled into the walls in a way I had never experienced before, and every sound seemed too sharp against it. The ticking clock in the hallway. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint rattle of branches outside my bedroom window whenever the February wind picked up. I barely slept during those first nights. Most mornings I found myself downstairs before sunrise standing barefoot in the kitchen while the coffee brewed, staring at the untouched birthday card still sitting beside the fruit bowl. Daniel's card was there too. He had mailed it 3 days before he died. The envelope sat unopened near the window because I could not bring myself to read his handwriting yet. On the Tuesday after the funeral, my private banker called around 8:30 in the morning. His tone sounded unusually careful. "Mrs. Whitmore, I just wanted to verify a transfer request submitted late yesterday involving one of your joint investment accounts." I tightened my grip on the coffee mug immediately. "What transfer request?" There was a brief silence on the line before he answered. "A request was submitted electronically from an authorized device associated with your son's profile. $250,000 into a temporary business holding account." I stared out at the frozen backyard while my heartbeat slowed into something heavy and deliberate. Daniel was dead. Was the transfer completed? I asked quietly. No, ma'am. The authentication process failed because the account required secondary approval. I thanked him calmly and told him to freeze all pending activity until I contacted him personally. My hand remained steady while I hung up the phone, but inside me something shifted permanently. That afternoon Vanessa arrived at my house carrying grocery bags and wearing a soft cream-colored sweater that made her appear younger and more fragile than usual. I was worried about you being alone, she said gently as she unpacked soup containers onto my kitchen counter. She moved around my house too comfortably now. Opening cabinets without asking. Rearranging things while she spoke. At one point she paused near the family room bookshelf where framed photographs of Daniel lined the shelves. You should think about simplifying things eventually, she said casually. A house this large can become overwhelming at your age. I looked at her carefully over the rim of my teacup. At your age. 3 words. Softly spoken. Sharpened like needles. I have managed this house for 34 years, I replied. She smiled quickly after that, but the warmth never reached her eyes. Then she mentioned something strange. By the way, Daniel had been under a lot of financial stress recently. I do not think he told you how bad things became. My chest tightened slightly because that made no sense. Daniel had always been careful with money. Excessively careful. Richard used to joke that our son balanced checkbooks for fun at 12 years old. What kind of stress? I asked. Vanessa looked away while placing silverware into the dishwasher. Business losses. Bad investments. He was trying to protect you from worrying. I said nothing, but later that evening I walked into Daniel's old study upstairs and sat quietly at his mahogany desk. The room still smelled faintly of cedarwood cologne and printer ink. Most of his books remained untouched, lined neatly against the shelves exactly as he left them during Christmas. I opened the bottom drawer slowly and found a leather folder containing property tax documents, investment summaries, and handwritten notes in Daniel's careful block lettering. Everything appeared organized. Stable. Profitable. There were no signs of financial collapse anywhere. Then I noticed something else. Tucked between 2 folders was a folded sticky note written entirely in Daniel's handwriting. 3 words. Trust no one. I stared at those words for a very long time while snow drifted softly outside the study windows. And for the first time in my life, sitting alone inside the quiet house my husband built for our family, I realized grief was no longer the only thing waiting for me there. 3 days later, Emma showed up at my front door just after sunset with snowflakes melting in her hair and a backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. She looked nervous standing there beneath the porch light, shifting her weight from one foot to the other the same way Daniel used to when he was hiding something as a child. Your mother knows you are here? I asked gently as I stepped aside to let her in from the cold. Emma hesitated before answering. She thinks I am at Claire's house studying. That alone told me more than she realized. Vanessa had never liked Emma spending time alone with me. At first I assumed it was one of those ordinary parenting preferences young mothers developed now. Structured schedules. Busy routines. But over the years, the distance became intentional. Birthdays shortened. Visits cancelled. Holidays rearranged at the last minute. And somehow, despite living less than 90 minutes away, I saw my granddaughter less each year. Emma followed me quietly into the kitchen while I reheated leftover chicken soup on the stove. She looked exhausted. Beneath the warm light above the counter. 16 years old, tall like Daniel, with the same thoughtful blue eyes that always seemed to notice more than people expected. You have not been sleeping, I said softly. She gave a faint shrug. Neither have you. I almost smiled at that because she was right. Grief recognizes itself. We sat together at the kitchen table while wind rattled lightly against the windows. For a while neither of us spoke. The soup steamed gently between us while the old wall clock ticked above the pantry door. Finally Emma looked down at her bowl and said quietly, "Mom keeps making phone calls when she thinks I am asleep." I remained very still. "What kind of calls?" Emma stirred her soup slowly with the spoon. "About money mostly. Lawyers. Insurance people. Somebody named Greg." The name meant nothing to me, but the tension in Emma's voice did. "Dad and Mom were fighting before he died," she continued carefully. "A lot more than usual." I felt my chest tighten again. "Did your father ever say why?" Emma nodded once but did not look up. "He thought somebody was lying to him about business accounts." Outside, snow slid softly from the roof with a muffled sound that made both of us glance toward the window for a moment. Then Emma lowered her voice further. "A week before the accident, I heard him tell Mom that he was changing everything." The room suddenly felt colder despite the heat running through the vents beneath the floor. "Changing what?" I asked. Emma swallowed hard before answering. "He did not say exactly. But he told her she would not control his money anymore." I stared at the steam rising from my untouched soup while pieces inside my mind slowly began connecting themselves together. The transfer request. Vanessa's questions. The story about Daniel losing money. None of it fit. Emma reached into her backpack quietly and pulled out a folded envelope. "I found this in Dad's desk after the funeral," she whispered. "Mom was looking for something in there yesterday, and I got scared she would find it first." I opened the envelope carefully with suddenly trembling fingers. Inside was a business card for Harold Bennett, our family attorney, with a note written on the back in Daniel's handwriting. "If anything happens, tell Mom to trust Harold. Not Vanessa." My heartbeat slowed into something heavy and deliberate again. Across the table Emma looked at me with frightened eyes that no child should ever have after losing a father. "Grandma," she whispered softly, "I do not think Dad trusted Mom anymore before he died." And sitting there beneath the warm kitchen lights while winter pressed silently against the windows of my empty house, I realized my son had been trying desperately to leave a trail behind before he disappeared from this world. I called Harold Bennett the next morning at exactly 9:05. I still remembered his office number by heart even after all these years because Harold had handled nearly every major decision Richard and I ever made together. Trusts. Investments. Property taxes. Retirement accounts. He was one of the few people left in my life who had known me before gray hair and funerals became regular companions. His assistant transferred me immediately the moment she heard my name. "Margaret," Harold said softly after answering, and something in his voice told me he had been expecting my call. "I think we need to meet in person." 2 hours later I drove into downtown Hartford beneath a sky the color of wet cement. The roads were lined with dirty snowbanks left behind from the storm earlier that week, and traffic crawled slowly through the financial district. Harold's office occupied the top floor of an old brick building overlooking the Connecticut River. Richard always loved that building because it reminded him of old New England strength. Quiet. Solid. Unmoved by trends. Harold himself looked older than I remembered when he opened the office door for me personally. His silver hair had thinned considerably, and deep lines framed his mouth now, but his eyes remained sharp and observant behind thin wire-rimmed glasses. He guided me silently into his office and closed the door before speaking again. "Has Vanessa contacted you about Daniel's accounts?" The directness of the question sent a chill through me. "Several times," I admitted carefully. Harold nodded slowly as though confirming something unpleasant. He walked toward his desk, unlocked a drawer, and removed a thick manila folder. "Daniel came to see me 11 days before his accident," he said quietly. My chest tightened immediately. "About what?" Harold hesitated before sitting across from me. He wanted to restructure several financial protections involving Emma. Outside the office windows, gray clouds drifted heavily above the river while the radiator hissed softly against the wall. I suddenly became aware of how fast my heart was beating. What kind of protections? Harold opened the folder carefully and slid several documents toward me. I recognized Daniel's signature instantly. Precise. Controlled. Confident. Your son established a protected trust worth approximately $4.2 million, Harold explained. The trust cannot be accessed by Vanessa under any circumstances. I stared at the papers without speaking. Why would Daniel do that? Harold removed his glasses slowly. Because he believed someone close to him was manipulating his business accounts. The room became very still after those words. I looked down at Daniel's signature again and suddenly remembered the tension in his face during our last Christmas dinner. The way he kept checking his phone. The way Vanessa interrupted him twice when he tried speaking privately with me in the kitchen. Harold continued carefully. Daniel also changed his power of attorney arrangements. I looked up sharply. To whom? You. I felt the air leave my lungs quietly. Harold folded his hands together across the desk. Margaret, your son specifically instructed me that if anything happened unexpectedly, I was to protect you and Emma first. Unexpectedly. Not if he died. If something happened. The wording mattered. Did Daniel tell you who he was afraid of? I asked quietly. Harold looked toward the office window for a moment before answering. He never said her name directly. But he did mention discovering unauthorized financial activity connected to someone very close to him. My fingers tightened against the edge of the folder. And Vanessa does not know about this trust? Harold's expression hardened. Slightly for the first time. No. And based on the calls my office has received this week, she believes Daniel's entire estate remains fully accessible through marital inheritance. Suddenly every conversation with Vanessa replayed itself differently inside my mind. The concern. The softness. The suggestions about moving in with her. None of it had been grief. It had been strategy. Harold leaned forward slightly in his chair. Margaret, I need you to listen carefully. Until we understand exactly what Daniel uncovered before his death, do not sign anything. Do not transfer anything. And most importantly, he paused there, studying my face carefully before finishing the sentence. Do not let Vanessa realize that you know more than she thinks you do. After leaving Harold's office, I sat inside my car for nearly 20 minutes without turning the engine on. Snowflakes drifted slowly across the windshield while people hurried along the sidewalks outside wrapped in scarves and dark winter coats, carrying coffee cups and briefcases as if the world had not changed completely. But mine had. The grief remained there inside me like a deep ache beneath the ribs, constant and exhausting, yet something else had begun settling over it now. Clarity. Daniel had known something was wrong before he died. He had tried to protect Emma. He had tried to protect me. And somehow, despite all his careful planning, he had still run out of time. By the time I returned home, evening shadows had already stretched across the long driveway leading to the house. Vanessa's silver Mercedes was parked near the front steps. I paused for a moment gripping the steering wheel because instinct suddenly told me to be careful. Not emotional. Careful. When I entered the house, I found Vanessa sitting at my kitchen table scrolling through something on her phone while half-finished tea sat beside her untouched. She looked up quickly and offered me a tired smile. I was getting worried, she said softly. You were not answering your phone. I removed my gloves slowly and hung my coat near the door before speaking. I stopped for groceries. It was a simple lie, but I watched her carefully while I said it. Vanessa nodded too quickly. Relieved too quickly. You really should not be running errands alone right now, she replied. You have been through so much. There it was again. That careful tone. Concern wrapped around control. I moved quietly through the kitchen placing a small paper bag onto the counter even though there was nothing inside it except an old receipt Harold had given me. You are probably right, I answered softly. I have not been thinking clearly lately. Vanessa's eyes lifted toward me immediately. I saw something flicker there for half a second. Interest. That night I deliberately left several financial folders spread across my dining room table before going upstairs. Empty folders. Old tax returns. Meaningless paperwork. Then I waited quietly inside my bedroom with the lamp off while the house settled into silence around me. Around midnight I heard footsteps downstairs. Soft. Careful. Measured. I remained perfectly still while floorboards creaked faintly beneath someone's weight below me. A drawer opened. Papers shifted. Then silence again. The next morning Vanessa appeared unusually cheerful while pouring herself coffee in my kitchen. I was thinking, she said lightly, maybe it is time we talked about simplifying things around here. I looked up from the newspaper slowly. Simplifying? The house. The accounts. Everything. Daniel handled so much for you. She stepped closer and rested one hand gently on my shoulder. You do not need the stress anymore. I lowered my eyes deliberately, letting my expression soften with uncertainty. I honestly do not even know where half the documents are anymore, I admitted quietly. Another lie. Vanessa smiled sympathetically. That is exactly why I want to help. Help. Such a harmless word. Richard used to say that dangerous people rarely sound dangerous at first. They sound helpful. Thoughtful. Patient. Later that afternoon Emma texted me from school asking if she could come over again that weekend. Before I could answer, another message appeared beneath it. Mom has been looking through Dad's office every night. I stared at the screen while rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows, melting the last dirty snow along the driveway. Upstairs, I heard Vanessa moving around the guest bedroom while humming quietly to herself. Comfortable. Confident. As though she already believed everything belonged to her. I set my phone face down on the table and looked toward the staircase slowly. Then for the first time since Daniel died, I made a decision that frightened even me. I was going to let Vanessa believe she was winning. The following Thursday, Vanessa suggested hosting a small family dinner at my house. Something quiet, she said while arranging white tulips in a vase near the dining room window. We all need normalcy again. The word sounded strange coming from her. Nothing about the past 2 weeks had felt normal. Still, I agreed without hesitation because by then I understood something important. The easiest way to learn the truth about people is to stop interrupting them while they reveal themselves. Vanessa invited 2 of Daniel's former business associates along with her younger brother Tyler, a man who always smelled faintly of expensive cologne and impatience. By 6 o'clock the dining room glowed softly beneath the chandelier while snow fell steadily outside again, covering the hedges and stone walkway in fresh white layers. I wore a dark green sweater Richard once gave me for Christmas and my usual pearl earrings. Vanessa complimented them immediately when guests arrived. Margaret always looks so elegant, she said with a smile too polished to be sincere. During dinner, conversation drifted between market trends, real estate prices, and stories about Daniel's work ethic. I noticed Vanessa steering every topic toward finances eventually. Daniel carried so much responsibility, she sighed dramatically while sipping wine. I honestly do not know how I will manage everything alone now. One of the businessmen nodded sympathetically. At least he left things organized. Vanessa lowered her eyes carefully before answering. Well, we are still trying to untangle some account issues. Account issues. Again. I quietly buttered my dinner roll while pretending not to notice how often her eyes moved toward me after comments like that. Halfway through dessert, Tyler leaned back in his chair and asked casually, "So what happens with the estate now?" The room grew slightly quieter after that question. Vanessa gave a small embarrassed laugh as though the subject made her uncomfortable, but I noticed she did not actually avoid answering. There are still legal details, she explained smoothly. Daniel handled most things jointly, but Margaret has been overwhelmed lately. I lifted my coffee cup slowly. Grief affects memory, I said softly. Vanessa reached across the table and touched my wrist with practiced tenderness. Exactly. Which is why I keep telling her she should let me help organize things. There it was again. Help. Always help. I nodded faintly as though the idea comforted me. You have been very supportive, I admitted quietly. Vanessa smiled immediately. Victories excite certain people more than kindness ever does. After dinner, while everyone moved into the family room for coffee, I remained alone briefly in the dining room gathering plates. Through the open doorway I could hear Tyler speaking in a lowered voice near the fireplace. Did she sign anything yet? Silence followed for a second before Vanessa answered sharply, not yet. I stopped moving completely. Then stop pushing so hard, Tyler muttered. You are going to make her suspicious. My fingers tightened around a dessert plate. She is 71 and grieving, Vanessa whispered back irritably. I just need more time. I stood there motionless while cold understanding spread slowly through my chest. Not confusion anymore. Not fear. Understanding. They had already discussed my money privately. Planned around it. Counted on it. A few minutes later Vanessa re-entered the dining room smiling brightly as though nothing had happened. You should not be cleaning alone, she said sweetly while reaching for the plates. I handed one to her carefully and looked directly into her eyes for the first time in days. You are right, I answered softly. I think I am finally starting to realize I cannot do everything by myself anymore. Relief flashed across her face so quickly she could not hide it in time. Just for a second. But that second told me everything. Upstairs, hidden inside the locked drawer of my bedroom desk, Harold's folder waited safely beside Daniel's handwritten note. And standing there beneath the warm dining room lights while Vanessa carried plates toward the kitchen pretending to be my devoted daughter-in-law, I realized something chilling. She no longer saw me as Daniel's mother. She saw me as the final obstacle standing between her and the life she thought she deserved. The next week passed quietly on the surface, but underneath that silence everything had begun moving faster. Vanessa spent more time at my house than her own. Some mornings I found her sitting at my kitchen island before I even came downstairs, already dressed perfectly with her laptop open and her phone pressed against her ear. Other times she disappeared into Daniel's old study for hours claiming she was organizing paperwork. I let her. That was the strange thing about truth. Once you stop fighting to prove it, people often reveal it willingly. On Wednesday afternoon Harold called while Vanessa was upstairs showering in the guest bathroom. His voice remained calm, but I could hear tension beneath it now. Margaret, I received another inquiry this morning regarding the trust. I closed the refrigerator slowly after hearing that. From Vanessa? No, he replied carefully. From a private financial consultant named Gregory Mills. Greg. The same name Emma mentioned. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while I stood there gripping the phone tighter. Who is he? Harold hesitated briefly. He specializes in asset recovery and estate restructuring. The wording alone made my stomach turn cold. And why would he be asking about Daniel's trust? Because someone appears to believe substantial assets are still accessible through inheritance channels. I looked toward the staircase instinctively. Upstairs I could hear faint footsteps moving across the guest bedroom floor. Can he access anything? I asked quietly. No, Harold answered firmly. But Margaret, I strongly suggest we move faster now. That evening Emma came over again carrying her schoolbooks and wearing Daniel's old navy Yale sweatshirt that hung loosely past her hands. She looked more comfortable in my house lately. Less tense. We baked blueberry muffins together while soft jazz played from the kitchen radio and the scent of vanilla filled the warm air around us. For a few moments, standing there beside my granddaughter while snow melted quietly outside the windows, life almost resembled something normal again. Then Emma broke the silence softly. "Mom has been seeing somebody." I stopped stirring the batter immediately. "What do you mean?" Emma looked down at the counter while peeling the paper wrapper from a stick of butter. "I saw messages on her phone a few weeks before Dad died." Her voice remained steady, but I could hear hurt beneath it. "She kept deleting them afterward." My chest tightened painfully because no matter how old a child becomes, betrayal inside a family always wounds them deeply. "Did your father know?" Emma nodded once. "I think so." She swallowed hard before continuing. "The night before the accident, they had a huge argument in Dad's office. I heard him say, 'You already took enough from me.'" The kitchen suddenly felt too warm despite the cold weather outside. I leaned against the counter quietly while Emma placed the muffin tray into the oven. "Did you ever tell anyone this?" I asked softly. "No," she whispered. "Mom said grief can make people imagine things that are not real." I closed my eyes briefly after hearing that because manipulation always sounds calm when it comes from the right mouth. Later that night, after Emma fell asleep in the guest room upstairs, I walked quietly into Daniel's old study again carrying only a small lamp. Shadows stretched across the walls while snow reflected pale blue light through the windows. I sat at his desk and opened the bottom drawer once more. This time I noticed something hidden beneath the false lining inside the back corner. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out a thin black flash drive wrapped carefully inside folded paper. On the paper, written entirely in Daniel's handwriting, were 6 words. "If you found this, be careful." I stared at those words for a long moment while the grandfather clock downstairs struck midnight slowly through the silent house. Then I looked toward the closed study door and realized something terrifying. My son had not simply feared losing money before he died. He had been preparing for something much worse. I waited until nearly 2 in the morning before plugging the flash drive into Daniel's old laptop. The house remained completely silent except for the soft hum of the heating vents and the occasional crackle from the fireplace downstairs. I sat alone in the study with only the desk lamp turned on, wrapped in Richard's old wool cardigan while snow drifted steadily beyond the dark windows. For a long moment nothing appeared on the screen except folders filled with financial reports and business spreadsheets. Then I found a file labeled simply, "Personal." My fingers hesitated over the trackpad before opening it. The first thing that appeared was a video recorded by Daniel himself. He looked exhausted sitting behind this same desk, his tie loosened, dark circles beneath his eyes. I had never seen my son look afraid before. "Mom," he began quietly, glancing toward the office door before speaking again. "If you are watching this, something probably went wrong." My throat tightened instantly. Daniel rubbed one hand across his face slowly. I did not know who else to trust anymore. Outside, wind rattled faintly against the windows while I listened to my dead son's voice fill the room. He explained everything carefully. Over the previous year, he had discovered unauthorized transfers moving through several business accounts connected indirectly to Vanessa's brother Tyler and a financial consultant named Gregory Mills. At first Daniel believed it was tax manipulation or hidden debt. But after hiring a private forensic accountant quietly, he realized millions of dollars had been redirected through shell companies connected back to Vanessa herself. When I confronted her, Daniel said heavily, she denied everything. Then she started acting like I was unstable, forgetful, paranoid. I closed my eyes briefly because the pattern sounded painfully familiar now. Daniel continued speaking into the camera with visible exhaustion. I changed the trust because I knew Emma would need protection if this became public. His voice cracked slightly there for the first time. I also moved Mom's accounts behind additional authorization layers. Vanessa does not know that yet. My hand trembled against the edge of the desk. Then came the final part of the recording. Daniel leaned closer toward the camera, lowering his voice. If something happens to me unexpectedly, do not believe everything at face value. And whatever you do, he paused, staring directly into the lens now. Do not let Vanessa control the estate. The video ended abruptly after that. I sat motionless in the quiet study while tears finally slid silently down my face for the first time since the funeral. Not loud grief. Not collapse. Just the unbearable ache of hearing my son try desperately to protect us while knowing he had been carrying all of it alone. A floorboard creaked suddenly somewhere in the hallway outside the study. I froze instantly and closed the laptop screen halfway. Soft footsteps passed slowly beyond the door before continuing down the staircase again. Vanessa. Even in the middle of the night she was still moving through the house searching for something. I waited several minutes before breathing normally again. Then I removed the flash drive carefully and slipped it into my sweater pocket. The next morning Vanessa appeared unusually cheerful while pouring herself coffee in the kitchen. I was thinking, she said casually, maybe this weekend we could finally meet with the estate advisor together. I looked at her calmly across the counter while sunlight reflected off the untouched snow outside. She wore soft makeup and a pale cashmere sweater, the picture of a grieving widow trying to hold a broken family together. If I had not seen Daniel's recording myself, I might have believed her too. That sounds like a good idea, I answered quietly. Relief flashed across her face again before she quickly hid it behind concern. I just want what is best for everyone, she said softly. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly and watched the pale swirl disappear into darkness. Then I finally understood the last thing grief had been trying to teach me. Losing my son had shattered my heart. But it had also stripped away every illusion I still carried about the people standing closest to me. And now that the truth was finally visible, I intended to make sure Daniel's final warning was not wasted.